Mac and Perry in the place. Da-na-na-na. Mac and Perry
go live to create.
Da-na-na-na. Mac and Perry invite you to stay.
Welcome to TELUS STORYHIVE's On Location here in Medicine Hat. I'm Michael Bartz. This is my co-host.
I'm Daniel J. Perryman, and today we have...
Shelley Ewing.
Shelley, I'm so excited to meet with you and learn about your artistic practice. Maybe just, tell us a bit about the sort of art you do.
I would say I do not one specific subject matter. I do quite a bit of different subject matter. It's anything that piques my interest. Sometimes I paint things that represent social problems in society. I guess I'm trying to send a message or get people to be more aware of them. Mm-hmm. But I also just paint things that are pretty. Like when I'm out on my bike, I see, scenery and want to share that with people. So I'm pretty much all over the place. I work in oil, acrylic, and watercolor. I just started getting back into my art practice in COVID because I was bored. I was doing something else that got shut down because of the things that happened through COVID. Mm-hmm. So I went and I purchased some supplies. I hadn't painted for 25 years because I was doing a job that I was painting at and having to be creative at. So I just started painting mostly scenery, but then since then I've delved into lots of different subject matter and I kind of go back and forth between watercolor, acrylic, and oil. I think I prefer acrylic because I'm a bit impatient with the oil. There's a lot of drying time and waiting, and so, but I am an impatient person, so it's maybe something I need to learn. But
nice, great, and maybe like going back, let's go as far back as we can remember, maybe. But when did you start first kind of making art when you were younger?
I remember, sitting with coloring books when I was 3-4 years old at my grandma's house. I spent a lot of time doing that, and then probably when I was a teenager, I started actually drawing my own drawings and painting. And I just found that I was very shy as a teenager and, too afraid to speak up or say anything. So I found that was an outlet for me to just be with myself and maybe, share what was inside of me, sort of thing. So I've always done it. And then I came to Medicine Hat College when I was probably 18 and took the visual communications. It was tied to the Alberta Art in Calgary curriculum. It was one of the first years that it opened here in Medicine Hat. And from there I just, I graduated and then started looking for a job, just like everyone else does. For
sure, yeah. I'd like to kind of dig into those things a bit more. So you were a teenager and and before that you're drawing and you're expressing yourself that way. And do you remember when you were younger, the kinds of things that you were drawing? Or?
Actually, one of the things when I was younger, it's totally different from what I do now, is I was very interested in fashion design. And so I drew a lot of fashion type drawings and fashion illustrations. I was probably influenced a little bit by my grandma on my dad's side. She was an excellent seamstress. She was known all over our hometown. She could sew without a pattern, and I just liked the texture of fabrics and styling making different styles that way. So that, from when I started drawing that, then I started moving into painting and started doing other subject matter. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, I think when you first start out, you're looking in books and stuff to try to see if you can render something, and then later on you've learned that you should be taking your own pictures and finding your own subject matter. So that's sort of the path that I went on.
And then, because you were in Saskatchewan when you were younger?
Yeah.
What brought you to Alberta?
Well, I moved here to go to Medicine Hat College. After I graduated, I think I chose Medicine Hat College because I did have family in town that I could stay here with. I was quite young, 18, didn't come from a small town. And I, even to this day, I prefer a small town. I'm not really a big city person. So I think it worked good for me. And it was a very, the teachers I had at Medicine Hat College were very influential on me. It was a very tight community, and they actually cared about the students. We weren't just numbers. And so I think it was a good place for me to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because if you remember roughly, Like how big was the program at the time? You said it was a new program, but
I think the first year, I was in first year, and it was probably 25 students in my class.
okay.
Then a lot of them dropped out going into the second year, and we only had about 8 students, but we really got excellent instruction then because we were so, almost one-on-one instruction. And there was a lot of different classes that I had been exposed to that I'd never even realized were part of art. You come from a small town, there's not really anyone to follow in a small town, so I was exposed to photography and printmaking and rendering and illustration and graphic arts. And at that time it was 1980, there was no computers, so everything had to be done by hand. So it was a totally different reality back then. And interestingly enough, that's in the art field, that's what I prefer to do now, is just doing it the old way. And I still use a computer sometimes to do some commercial stuff, but I think because I did it for so many years at work, I have moved away from that. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe more of just that tactile kind of connection with the material.
Yeah, it's a totally different thing. When I left work in 2015, I had started out there, like I said, doing everything by hand. And then probably in the late 80s, we started getting computers and had the first, Photoshop 1.0. And it was very trying because there wasn't a lot of knowledge about the programs yet, and there was no training. And so you're learning all by yourself. And there was a lot of hardware problems handling all the, it took half an hour for one print to come out of the printer. So it was quite frustrating. There was lots of, nights that I was at work for 3 hours past my time to go home, trying to get things to work so that scientists had their stuff the next day. But then when I left in 2015, I was doing like 3D rendering and those kind of programs. And it was a very high learning curve, but working for the government, I was very lucky that I had opportunities to go get training. So I went to Toronto and to San Francisco and got some training in like 3D programs. You certainly don't have time to learn them to their fullest capacity. You really just learn what you're going to use it for. So I saw that potential there, and I still to this day have admiration and respect for people that do that kind of work because it's amazing what they do. But when I got out of work, I think I don't like all the bad things that can go wrong with computers, and the frustration. And you still get frustrated doing your work by hand sometimes, but it's a different type of frustration. And so I don't really want to do my fine artwork on a computer.
And so you mentioned like they're kind of giving you that confidence. Like, so when you went into the program, were you thinking I want to be a full-time artist, or what were you thinking at that time?
Yeah, I really didn't know what kind of job I was going to get. There wasn't a lot of computers. Everything was done by hand. And back in those days, there was a lot of ad agencies. So you needed to, that's where you would apply for a job or a newspaper. And I guess at a newspaper, you would be doing probably less creative work. But nowadays, it's a lot different because people have that, right on the power on their desktops in their own homes and stuff. So I think the whole industry has changed that way. Sure. And I just happened to be very lucky to get the job I had. I was at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, well, I guess, yeah. Tell me about that.
A little bit of synchronicity happened there.
Is that kind of the next stage of your even artistic career, but your general career? So you graduated. Tell me what came next.
Well, I graduated and I first moved to Calgary, and I got a job doing marketing for a clothing company. But Calgary was booming in the 80s, and I really did not like it. I was from a small town, and I was trying to drive around and go to different stores, and I was like just out of my element. And at the same time, Medicine Hat had it was 1983 around, and we had our 100th anniversary year. And I won the logo contest for Medicine Hat's anniversary, and I was in the paper. Back in those days, we didn't have any social media, so paper was where you got your your advertising. And it just so happened my college professor saw that I had won this, and he somehow tracked me down in Calgary and told me that there would be an opportunity coming up at the base, working for this scientific research place that I knew nothing about. And the reason it was coming up because his wife was doing that job and she was quitting because she found that being 50 kilometers out of town was far away when you had small kids coming home after school. So he just gave me a name of a scientist, and I was, back in those days, I was very shy and not assured of myself, but I cold called this guy, this PhD scientist, and introduced myself. And then one thing led to the other, and I brought my portfolio in an interview, and they basically hired me the next day. So
cool.
That's how lucky I was.
Yeah. And you spent the next 30 some years doing that, right?
Yeah, well, the job at first was just a temporary position. So I was hired for 45 days. And it's one of those things, I had a job in Calgary. Do I move back to Medicine Hat and take a chance, quit that job for a 45-day job and then get laid off? But I did it. And what happened is after the 45 days was up, they extended me for 6 months at a time. And that went on for 5 years. And then after 5 years, once you're extended that much over and over again in the government, they have to make the position permanent. And then I had to apply for my job again.
Nice, yeah. Yeah, and was that job that you were doing, was there a creative element to that work?
Yes, but not what I thought I would find myself doing. It wasn't as creative as, I think at first I was kind of quite bored with it, but then over the years it kind of expanded with bringing computers and finding a way to actually teach a science story that would actually interest other people. So using visuals to represent very complex ideas and kind of dumbing them down so the message gets across. The job was illustration, but it was also a bit of marketing, like brochures and doing, backdrops and museum posters, things like that. I did a large part of the military museum in Calgary. They had it was actually about autonomous systems, like the very beginning of drones. So Suffield was our part of it was my time. And so I got to do things like that. So that part of it was creative because it moved back and forth between different kind of applications, from boring things where I was doing maybe infographic type posters to, doing whole 3D concepts of scientific things they maybe are made yet. They're maybe just somebody's idea. Or something you can't photograph, like something happening in the body that might be pharmacological research, or something taking part over a long, area, like a lot of miles in between, like missiles and things like that. So it was very interesting learning the science as well, because I have no science background. So trying to understand these PhDs talking to me for 3 hours about their idea sometimes was way over my head, and I had to reiterate a lot back to them and ask them questions so I understood what exactly they were aiming for. And so eventually, just between that and, asking a lot of questions, we would eventually get there.
In that work, could you maybe have a thought around how that maybe influenced your artistic practice or creativity?
I think what it did was, when you're illustrating science, you have to be fairly accurate, because you're trying to convey a certain message and maybe specific equipment, and they want to see, this certain aspect of the equipment. So what I find now is I paint actually quite tight, and I'm trying to loosen up a bit. So I think in some ways it had a bit of a bad influence on where I would like to go with my art. It's not that it's bad or right or wrong, because with art it's very subjective, and I do sell probably 80% of my paintings. So it's not like there's not someone that appreciates that. It's just, I think because I am that kind of artist, when I see somebody do something that's more loose, and I really appreciate that. And it's probably because I find that very hard to do. So I think that it did have a very big influence on me over the years, trying to do everything exact and perfect, and, you know, make sure that it's, you know, everything's represented perfectly. And I just tend to gravitate towards art that's more abstract, which is weird.
Weird, yeah.
Yeah, it's very weird. Like I just like paintings of nothing, you know.
What draws you to the abstract paintings?
I think it's probably just the color and the balance and the movement that I see in them, and it's not anything that's being made, you know, that somebody's had to make that out of their head. It's not something they're looking at. And when I've sat down to do that, those paintings have caused me loss of sleep. You know, like I get quite turmoil inside because you're just painting nothing that you can look at. There's no reference. It's all in your head. And whereas if you have a scenery picture, you know, you're painting it, you're still interpreting it and putting your own subjective mix into it. But, you know, you do have something for a reference. So I find the abstract very, very hard. But I make myself do it once in a while just to try to loosen up a bit.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, especially it's very different than your scientific research work, where it has to be very accurate.
Yeah, I might get there someday, but I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, it's okay.
You know.
Yeah, that both things kind of have influence.
I'm pretty casual about, you know, I did have a career, a formal career, and so now I'm really just painting for fun. You know, what I feel like that day kind of thing. I don't really try to paint to sell paintings. When I first started painting in COVID, I started with watercolor. So I ended up with, you know, 10 watercolors. And I said to my husband, what am I going to do with all these paintings? Because one thing that seems to be very different about me than other artists I've spoken to is I'm not attached to the painting. When I'm done it, see you later. Like, I'm attached to the process, the actual process of creating it. That's where I get my satisfaction from. So I don't care if I have the painting after. So I just posted them on, you know, online, and because it was a picture of a local scene, I had probably 6 or 7 people contact me and want to buy it. So I said to my husband, well, this is kind of a thing, I guess. So I'll just keep doing this. And that's really how I've sold most of the paintings, is, you know, not by any formal. And I've had a couple of galleries reach out to me just of late, south of Edmonton. I'm not sure where they saw my work. And this summer I will be submitting some stuff in the Calgary Stampede because they've invited me to participate. In the Calgary Stampede, you usually need an invite to go to that. So I don't know if those galleries were associated with that because they're kind of from around the Calgary area. So it might have been something like that. So it's very weird how, you know, it moves across different places that you can show your art. I haven't really actually made an attempt to actually, you know, have a plan or anything. And maybe that's not right, but it's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I think you talked a bit about, you know, that's getting out in nature and stuff. Yeah, maybe tell me a bit more about what else inspires you to when you make your art.
I tend to be, I guess, a very touchy-feely person. Things in society bother me sometimes. So I think that gets somewhere inside me where it creates an emotion that I want to convey. Things that I started painting, like you know, one painting a year with an Indigenous theme. That was sort of peaked when all the Truth and Reconciliation came up in Canada. I think going to school, you know, we weren't taught a lot about that area in our country. And ironically, I grew up in North Battleford, which has 6 or 7 Indigenous reserves around, and there's a lot of racism and a lot of, you know, bad things have happened over the years in that area. But, you know, we were very unaware of that history in Canada. And I tend to be a person that doesn't like, if I see vulnerable groups getting targeted, whether it be Indigenous, whether it be immigrants, or whether it's LGBTQ or trans issues, it gets under my skin. And it does it enough that it propels me to paint something about it. So that's been another outlet for me. And those aren't paintings that, you know, I know they're not going to be sellers or things that people want on their wall, most likely. But I just feel better after they're painted, you know, and I just put the image out online, and it creates a situation where people might think about these things and start to maybe realize there's something there they could learn too. Because there's still a lot of learning that I have to do. Like, I don't know, you know, even a tidbit of it yet, but I have taken the time to go, for instance, with the Indigenous, to go to some powwows, and, you know, I'll just go up and introduce myself and tell them I'm an artist, and then I'll ask permission if I can paint them. And then I usually find the person maybe a year or two down the road. I look for them again, and I just give them the painting. You know, I just gift it to them. And it's sort of my reconciliation, just to bring awareness to that subject area. So there's just different things like that I've done. Some of the politicalness in our society also bothers me that's going on. And I think there's a lot of people unaware of some of the things. So I try to paint things sometimes that speak to that, so people will just pay attention. I'm not really trying to tell them exactly what they should think or what they should do, but you know, somewhere along the line something piqued my interest to start, and that's all I'm trying to really do. So I tend to go off in that area, and then, you know, when those subjects are kind of overwhelming, then I go back to painting flowers or trees or something just, you know, that's more relaxing and simple.
I don't know if you can think of anyone like that comes to mind that like maybe saw one of your pieces about that, maybe some of those topics, and maybe was impacted or did start a conversation, whether in person or otherwise. I don't know, was there any situations that come to mind?
Yeah, I think when the Ukraine war started, I started painting Ukrainian type themes. And surprisingly, I had a lot of people that were very positive towards them. They were more just their dress and their heritage and things like that. And I sold the paintings, all the paintings, and I donated the money to the Red Cross for the Ukraine effort. So that kind of made a lot of awareness, and people, I think, started paying attention. I've also had that response with the Indigenous. You know, I've had people over the years, you know, say things to me about Indigenous that, you know, I was taken aback by, that they just, you know, negative comments, and over knowing them for 3 or 4 months, and then, you know, they see that I'm not giving up on it, sort of thing, that I'm still going on about this. I've seen people turn around and reconsider their positions on things. The same thing with the trans issue, the kids, the LGBTQ, all that kind of stuff. I have seen people respond and then maybe realize that, you know, there's no human being that wants to be singled out or separated. And I just see so much of that in society right now. When there's problems, we, you know, instead of it, maybe it's my fault, maybe what could I do to change my life? It's pushed on something else. And it's like, if we can just get rid of this problem or these people, then our life will be better. And I guess as a human being, it just bothers me. Like, it gets right under my skin. So I'm a very vocal person locally, and sometimes with my art about that, because I just want people to realize that they're really probably just like you. They just want to be accepted. They just want to be heard. They just want to be, you know, they want the same things. Like lately there's been, you know, a lot of stuff about immigrants now. We're on to that again. And so I don't know, maybe my next painting will be about an immigrant. I don't know. I had an opportunity to, when I retired, to work for a Samis immigration in town. I volunteered there to help teach English to immigrants. So there was immigrants from the Middle East, from Africa, from all over the place. And you hear their stories and you hear what they've gone through, and there is not one of us walking in Canada that would not do the same thing and want to try to change our lives to get a better opportunity for ourselves, for our children, whatever, family members. Mm-hmm. Some of them have seen atrocious things. So my voice through my art is just to get people to consider how you would feel walking in someone else's shoes. That's basically a very generic statement, but that's really all I'm trying to do.
How has your artistic practice or your art influenced your everyday life?
Oh, I think it enriches my life because when you're retired, you need something to do. So first of all, it's a time filler for me. I can sit down and it can be 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and before I know it, it's 5 or 6 o'clock, and I've put music on and I just sit and paint, and it's just very fulfilling. Mm-hmm. So I think that it enriches your life, really, because what would I be doing otherwise? I'm not a TV watcher, so, and if the weather is not biking weather, then, like today, I guess you could ride your bike today if you had a fat tire, but, it gives you something to do, because I'm not a person that can sit around and do nothing. I have to be doing something all the time. So
great, yeah.
So I'm very thankful I have that, because I know a lot of people don't have a hobby like that, or something to do. So I'm very thankful for it.
Absolutely, yeah. That's lovely, yeah. So this is all the time we have for this segment. So really appreciate learning about your artistic practice, and I'm looking forward to the showcase where we're going to see some of your work and talk more detail about that and the stories behind it. So This has been TELUS STORYHIVE's On Location here in Medicine Hat. I'm Michael Bartz. This is my co-host,
Daniel J. Perryman, and this is me,
Shelley Ewing.
All right, and we'll be right back.
Okay, and welcome back to TELUS STORYHIVE's On Location here in Medicine Hat. I'm Daniel J. Perryman, and this is my co-host,
Michael Bartz, and today we have
Shelley Ewing.
Yes, thank you so much for taking the time and energy to meet with us, and I thoroughly enjoyed your segments with Michael. I'm super excited to jump in and do a showcase with you, and talk about some of your pieces, hear about the inspiration behind them, and just see what's up. So I think the first one we're going to start with is the one right behind us up here, and I believe it's called Bountiful is the name. What can you tell me about this piece?
Well, this piece was inspired by my visit to Head Smashed in Buffalo Jump, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. I was just there with my husband one day. We went on a impromptu road trip. It was quite a ways to drive, but I was glad we did it because I had driven past it many times in my life and never stopped. And it was amazing to learn about the Indigenous history. And the day we were there, we could see a storm coming in. You could see for miles. You could see the Alberta landscape. And, I was reading about how bountiful that place was for Indigenous when they did the artifacts or dug the artifacts. There were artifacts they found, 40 feet deep. And it's, over 1,600 years or something. They figure people were there using it. And, now that they're not using that anymore, you can look across the land and see how that bountifulness has moved on to the farmers and the ranchers that, do all the food growing for us and, give us everything that we have to eat. So I just kind of had one of those moments to see how things transfer from the first peoples in Canada to the people that live here now. And the landscape was it's just pretty. It's just beautiful. So I tend to exaggerate colors a lot, so I just brought that to the painting and exaggerated the storm, and that's what came out.
What was it like learning about that history of the land, and then based on also what you know about it now?
Well, when you're there and you're standing there, I went around on the inside and read all the information that was there, but you're standing outside and you're just trying to picture what these people are doing. And one of I have been at another site in Saskatoon, kind can't remember what that one's called now, right off with the bat. But, you know, in learning about the way they used to run these buffaloes, like, it was very dangerous because they had people that were standing on the sides guiding them, and the buffaloes were kind of chasing them. And a lot of them got run over and trampled. But they did that so that their whole, you know, the goal was that the whole tribe got to eat. And so you can see how they're not, it's not a selfish culture. It's very, you know, I'm okay, but I want you to be okay. So I took that from it, and that's why I call it bountiful. So.
Nice. Yeah, and then the colors, like what is that process like, adding the colors? Does it start kind of neutral, or do you like throw the color on there right away?
I kind of block color down, but it starts more neutral. I tend to have a very strong sense of color, and I tend to always gravitate that way, so I exaggerate color. So, you know, when I see brown, someone might see brown, I see purple and blue and greens in that color, and so I always bring that out. That's sort of been a common theme, and even when I was working digitally at work. You know, one of the things, we had a photocopier there is kind of related to color, and it would get off its, you know, color balance. And the repairman that came used to say he hated coming to Suffield because I had such a strong sense of color that he'd run the prints, and I'd say, no, it's still too, you know, it's still too pink, or it's still too whatever. So I think that comes out in my painting. It's just, I've tried to tamp it down sometimes, but it never works out for me. So I'm just going to let it go.
Yeah, just lean into it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. The next piece we'll jump into is this piece right here. So I'm going to carefully try and pull it out.
Okay.
I'll just bring it in front here. And yeah, might not be able to see the full thing in the frame.
You could hold it up here.
Yeah,
do you want to lift it?
Pull it up.
Or,
Ooh. Yeah, it's a bit tall.
Yeah.
Well, I'll move it up and down, and we'll get some view of it. But yeah, what can you tell me about this piece? What's it called?
This piece is called Fractured Political Dance, and I had this picture of this ballerina. I always wanted to paint her more for just the structure of painting human body. I like painting the human body for some reason. It challenges me. But as I was doing it, you know, there's a lot of political issues happening between Canada and the United States. And, you know, one of the statements I want to make is that it's not the people of the United States, it's not the citizens. This painting is really trying to convey the loss of a friendship, the loss of a knowing relationship that you could rely on for many years, the loss of maybe not being heard and not... you know, not be able to get your message across. And I think why I tied it to dance is, like, dance, you know, especially a ballerina, there's a lot of hurdles to overcome, and you're going back and forth, forward, backwards, up, down. Sometimes you're exhausted by the spin that's spinning around you. So I found the parallels I was feeling with what was going on in the political dance that we're having with the United States right now. You know, one day we see kind of promise moving forward, and the next day it's
two steps back.
Yeah, it's very dismal. So I just thought it could convey that with the two flags, and that's why I added them to the ballerina picture.
Our next piece that we're going to talk about is this awesome piece right here, I believe called Reverence. Yeah, what can you tell me about this piece?
So this piece was just a little girl. She was at a powwow in Medicine Hat, probably about 2021. She was praying before her jingle dance, and I asked her if I could take a picture of her, and asked her mother for permission, and then told them I would be painting them. I took their names down, but I lost the name somewhere, so that part I'm saddened for, because we tried to find her, and the lady that actually took this picture has also tried to find her, and we can't find her. So we don't know where that particular powwow there was people from all over, like from Manitoba to the Blood Reserve south of Lethbridge.
Right.
So we don't know if she's more local or further away. But, you know, I put the image out there, and if I ever found her, I would give her the picture. I just put this stylized sage in the background because to the Indigenous, the sage is a very sacred plant.
Yeah.
So I put that in because you could actually feel her reverence for her. That's why I called it that. When she was praying, she was just, you know, there was hundreds of people around. It was noisy, bright colors, and she was just really praying, really into herself. And then she went and did the dance. So, and I just think the culture is, like physically, the way they present their costumes and their beading, it's just really beautiful.
Yeah. And
I'm probably attracted to it because I'm attracted to color. So.
Yeah, and yeah, so like the intricacies, like I can see the intricacies through your painting, right?
And that's me with my, you know, being tight again.
Yeah.
I would like to loosen that up, but some people just say, well, yeah, it looks good. Why don't you just leave it, you know? But, you know, it's like that artist thing. You want to move along the line and maybe challenge yourself to do something different or make something look different, or you see someone else's painting and it influences you. And but I think with art, there's always going to be some part of you that's not ever going to get erased. That you're, even if you know, I ever got to an impressionist stage, it would probably be on the very edge of impressionism. It wouldn't be really loose. So I'll just keep going. I'm not, you know, I don't put any boundaries on myself. I just challenge myself and see where it goes.
And then the last thing I'll touch on is also the orange border. I know some people don't paint the edges because it may not be seen, but
yeah, I always paint the edges, but I don't really have a rule what I paint. I paint it orange because orange is a color that is used for the Indigenous, for the Every Child Matters.
Yeah.
And she was, you know, an Indigenous child, so I painted orange. One of the other paintings I did for missing and murdered Indigenous women has a red border. Sometimes I just wrap the painting around the side and paint around the side, like I did with this one. So I don't really have a rule what I do, but a lot of people don't frame these when they buy them, and so I don't like to leave the edge unfinished. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Nice.
Awesome. Unfortunately, there's so many more pieces that we could look at, but I think that is all the time that we have for this segment. So thank you again so much for your time and energy. And,
thank you for coming. I really appreciate the exposure, and I appreciate that TELUS has this program that can employ people and you know, help share the arts across Alberta. I think it's very important. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. So this has been TELUS Storyhives on Location in Medicine Hat. I'm Daniel J. Perryman. This is my co-host,
Michael Bartz, and this has been
Shelley Ewing.
Yay! Awesome. Thank you so much for watching.
If you or someone you know has a story to tell, scan this QR code and get in touch with the Storyhive on Location team.